So I talked a little bit last time about essay form and structure and how that generates interest and pleasure in the reader. And I think that now I want to just back that up into sentence, word choice, even into syllables and the individual sound units or phonemes within the words. The way that I think of vibe ratios starts with the way things sound, because a word is a sound or several sounds before it is a meaning in your mind. You can hear words and enjoy them without even knowing what they mean. And I think that this is fundamental to generating interest in your reader. I think that interest or beauty, or whatever you want to call it, engagement with an audience, what makes an audience engage, too often the most privileged aspect of audience engagement is the idea that you're trying to convey. Do you have interesting ideas? I think there's a spectrum, or maybe a continuum, where interesting presentation is on one side and interesting ideas are on the other. So if you have a really, really interesting idea, you can get away with not conveying it in an interesting way. Most people don't have brilliantly interesting ideas about anything. It's not to say you're not a unique thinker, but it takes quite a bit of life experience or a unique situation that you want to write about to make your experience so interesting that people don't care about how it's conveyed. I think that on some level, people always care, because if you have a really cool idea, but your prose is sloppy or full of cliches, someone else will have a similar idea and convey it in a more interesting way or more aesthetically pleasing way. So with vibe ratios, what I want to teach is privilege the concept of the structure of the conveyance more than the idea itself. And I think there's a feedback loop that happens where the more concentration that goes into the composition of the sentences and the word choice so that it sounds good and looks good on the page. And we'll talk about the difference between the audio and the visual, but it's sound for me. The more attention you pay to that process of getting it to sound the right way, or the way that is closest to your most perfect expression, the more the ideas will start to refine in your mind and become better. There's a relationship, I think, between how interesting an idea is and if it stands the test of multiple revisions. What happens is you cut out the parts of the idea that are least likely to engage the audience, because you start to select for only what's essential and what's most creative and what has the most potential to bloom into other more interesting connections, right? I use the word interesting a lot in this, I'm aware. And again, you can slot a different modifier in there if you want to, depending on your own process and your own what you're doing when you attempt something. So what I'm really saying is that when I talk about something like concision and cutting out extraneous language, or language that slows the reader's mind down when it wants to speed up, or speeds a reader's mind into an area it doesn't want to go, what you're doing is you're turning down the temperature on the idea instead of turning it up and creating a momentum. So sound and the structure of the language itself and the structure of the sentences and even the layout of the paragraphs, how long they are, um, you know, how they appear on the page in relation to one another. If there's white space, are they bulleted? Are they numbered? Are they subheadings? I mean, there's all sorts of design elements that can go into writing an essay that grabs the reader's attention. If I can see it from a distance, if I can see that it's different from a distance, I'll lean in a little closer and I'll focus on it, right? This is one of the disservices that the standard MLA format does to the writer, I think, especially the college writer or the young writer or the inexperienced writer. Everybody it all has to look the same, right? And that's an academic standard, but it's not one that we should take very seriously. You should learn how to do it, because if you have a professor who requires it and will grade you on it, then by all means learn how to make it look like everything else. And I get it. What they're saying is that the interesting ideas are what matters most, and then the presentation, other than the presentation that you can affect within the sentences, doesn't matter. That kind of person, the person who privileges that way of creating an essay and formatting an essay, will probably also want a certain type of sentence structure as well, within a range, right? Like they might want some good word choice, some appropriate verb choice. They might want an intelligence to come off the page, but their idea of what makes something intelligent will be different from mine, probably, because I privilege the creative act of each choice within a sentence. And I believe most word choices represent an opportunity between lots of different potentials. And what I enjoy most when I read, if I'm really slowing down and paying attention the way you ought to, or the way I ought to, what's happening is I'm moving into a zone of collaboration with the writer, and I'm guessing at their choices before they make them, and then reveling in, or perhaps judging, the choices they actually make. But all of that is in the spirit of wishing that the thing would be as aesthetically pleasing as it can be, knowing that that's a subjective term, right? But still, I'm the reader, and so I get to decide if I'm pleased or not, and that's just the way it works. So, but there are ways, I think, for using the vibe ratios theory of composition and editing, there are ways to, I would say, affect the reader's aesthetic before they even begin to think about your ideas. So the better the title sounds, the better the first sentence sounds, the better the first clause in the first sentence sounds. You set a bar of aesthetic pleasure at every turn, right? You make that sound good, and then the next thing sound good in relation to it. And pretty soon, they didn't know it, but they're on this kind of journey with you, and their expectations have been exploded into a bunch of fragments that will either grow their own mycelium and root and come together again, or kind of remain adrift and dry up and die. Not the best metaphor, but it is what happens when I read something, generally. The problem with being a writing teacher for community college composition and so once in a while creative writing, the problem as I see it is that I have to undo a bunch of bad habits, or habits that, not bad, they're habits that have been sort of drilled into you as good that aren't good in every situation. Writing situations should be each one unique. You say, oh, well, I'm writing essay 2, right, in my class. Essay 2 should look a lot like essay 1, just with different words and different concepts because we read a different text. To me, that's not what writing should be. Essay 2 should be, well, I did something in essay 1. I don't want to do that again because this is a different situation. Maybe I could start with 3 one-word paragraphs. Maybe that'll catch someone's attention. Maybe it'll look like a list of life goals. Maybe it'll be the names of, my 3 biggest influences on my supposed career path or something, or my proposed career path. I don't know. Maybe you start with a description of a dream that you had or that you've had multiple times. And, there's just so many ways, so many entry points to your own writing process that can generate enthusiasm in the reader. And lines like, in this essay, I will explore, or I will prove, or blah, blah, blah. Those kinds of lines do the opposite. They're neither interesting in and of themselves because they don't convey an idea. They just set up the conveyance of an idea. Nor are they fun to read in any kind of artistic way, right? How do you subvert that? Well, you look at the vibe ratios. You look at your parts of speech. You look at your nouns and verbs in relation to you look at your content words, your nouns and verbs, and your adjectives in relation to your function words, all the other parts of speech, pronouns, conjunctions, prepositions especially. Do they represent opportunities for refinement? Does word order in a sentence create a necessity for more concentrated thinking? These are questions you need to ask as you go along. Does this make the writing process long and tedious sometimes? Yeah. Is tedium the thing that frees you as a thinker? Yes. Unfortunately, that's generally the case. The more bored you are and the more ready you are to take off your shoes and run across the grass and get some energy out, probably the better your writing is going to be. You got to sit down and do it, right? So I'm glad you're on this journey with me. I want these videos to feel unscripted but useful to you. And as I throw them in this platform, what I'm really trying to do is create a kind of personalized certificate, basically, where you complete the course and you think, I've learned a bunch of things about writing that I didn't know before, rather than I learned that I can accomplish the task of writing 4 essays in a class or something like that, right? Which I think is what a lot of writing classes sort of aim to teach you. Did you complete the tasks? Did you complete them satisfactorily? Okay, you passed the class. This is more like, okay, you've passed into another realm of being able to do this thing we call writing, and you can now understand what it means for you to connect to an audience. You can affect an audience if you do 3 or 4 things on the page, and you can have confidence that will always work, because the reader's subconscious can't help but enjoy a well-crafted sentence, something that sounds good. If it sounds good, it is good.